Welcome to the AI+HI Project, a SHRM podcast. I'm your host, Nichol Bradford, SHRM's executive in residence. Today, we are exploring the intersection of AI, ethics, responsible innovation, and workplace transformation with Paula Goldman, Chief Ethical and Humane Use Officer at Salesforce. Paula brings unique insights into developing ethical frameworks for AI deployment while ensuring human-centered technological advancement. Welcome to the AI+HI Project, Paula.
I am so excited for this conversation. Thank you for having me.
I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, ever since I heard you on stage talking about human-centered AI adoption. And that's when I knew that I had to get you on the show. So your role as Chief Ethical and Humane Use Officer at Salesforce is quite unique. Can you share how this role evolved and what are the foundational principles that guide it?
Absolutely. So that Salesforce created this Office of Ethical and Humane Use. We actually celebrated our 5th-year anniversary earlier this year. And I will say, with the benefit of hindsight, it felt very prescient for the company to create this function because right now we're in this incredible moment with AI where agentic AI is being introduced and adopted across all sizes of enterprises. And it's transforming, as you know, how we do work, right? But I'm grateful to Salesforce's leadership for having the foresight to know that we needed to build AI right from the start. So around 5 years ago, when we created this office, really we built it to focus on what I'll call 3 Ps. Actually, I'm going to correct myself and say 4 Ps. So I'll come to the fourth one. But the first one is principles, right? And we have a set of principles we had a set of principles for machine learning. We actually then amended them last year for generative AI, and just a couple weeks ago put out a new set of principles for agentic AI. I'll come back to that. Policies, which are sort of like red lines for how customers use these types of products and kind of create a floor for responsible use. And then, not least, products, right? So it's how do we work with our engineering and our product teams to make sure that what we're building is both trustworthy and people know how to use it to get the outcomes that they want from AI. So I mentioned 3 Ps, but there's a fourth P, right? Which is people. Because at the end of the day, my job is actually sort of like a culture job. It's to make sure that never be effective to work on the ethical use of technology as sort of one group in a corner, sort of doing all of the work. It has to be a whole of company enterprise. And so it's working with people at every level and in every department to make sure that these questions are top of mind and that we're finding the best solutions that we can.
Thank you for sharing those principles. Our audience is human resource managers and leaders. And so they're touching the organization while AI is being implemented. Can you help them understand how those principles could be applied to their role in assisting the integration of agentic AI?
Absolutely. So I really think that human resources leaders have one of the most important jobs in this agentic AI era because we introduce AI agents into the workplace. And just to take a step back and talk about that for a second, what that means. So it means that technology is sort of evolving from deterministic tools really to partners in how we do work, right? And so with an AI agent, let's say you're working in marketing or you're working in customer service, you can set up agents to take on complex tasks on behalf of your customers and to reason through those tasks and then come and autonomously deliver those tasks with the sort of human oversight, essentially to set the guardrails from the beginning and then to come back and evaluate the results. That is a paradigm shift in how we do work. So it means that how we do work is changing, and that there's a great need in to bring people to center people in that transformation to make sure that our people have the literacy and the skills needed to get the right outcomes from AI and to use AI to turbocharge their own work, right? And that can be a brilliant, brilliant future for how we all, have uh, just increased our ability to have impact at work. But it requires guardrails and it requires foresight and it requires, as you just said, ethics, right? So, with all of that said, I think if I were in the position of being a human resources leader, I'd be thinking about a few key action items. I'm actually going to say probably four of them, right? One of them is setting clear policies. And they don't have to be extensive, but just clear policies about how to use AI and how not to use AI, right? So, a lot of it might come down to the question of making sure that confidential data, confidential corporate data doesn't get used outside of its correct paradigm, right? Like for training third party models or so on. A second might be about having a control center so that we know inside a company how AI is being used and we're assessing it and we're assured that we are using it in safe ways and that we can change the dial when we need to make improvements or changes and so on. A third is really about creating a culture of ethical AI and giving room for employee voice around it so that employees are able to ask questions and raise their hand and see, create opportunities for where AI can be used and where they're seeing pain points that AI could be helpful for. And also, honestly, where they have like concerns, because you want to know where those concerns are and what those questions are to be able to get to the most effective solutions and the most effective, what I call AI human partnerships at work. And then finally, the fourth, which is really about skills. So I think that there are some core skills around using AI, but a lot of it is about confidence and literacy and really just having exposure. The best way we know how to use, for example, a large language model is by playing around with it and understanding what are the types of questions that answers well and what types of questions do you need to reprompt it and reprompt it to get the best result? And I think that kind of exposure and literacy and confidence is really what's going to be needed to have the best outcomes with our people in combination with AI.
One of the things that you mentioned a moment ago was human AI partnerships. And we've talked about human and AI collaboration. Can you explain what you mean by that and also what you hope for with that?
AI is really, really powerful, right? Um, but it is different than human intelligence. And I think this is, it's part of this big public conversation about AI. Um, and part of the fascination is, and part of the power of this, the wave of generative AI, now the wave of agentic AI is, for example, that it is able to communicate, AI is able to communicate with people sort of in a conversational tone and we can use it using natural language. All of this requires a little bit of a reset and a shift about how we think about what AI is and what it's capable of in comparison to humans. But here's how I think about it. People are really good at things like, generally speaking, it's hard to generalize about all of humanity, but bear with me for a moment. People are really good at things like um, contextual judgment. A unique situation comes around and people have to judge what to do in that circumstance, leveraging what they've learned from other circumstances. Relationship building, thinking about innovation for the future, and so on, right? AI is really good at taking mountains of data and processing it to generate insights that might, for example, be literally not visible to the human eye. For example, in the case of AI vision looking through medical results or something like that. Or it AI is also able to generate insights at speed, right? So people would never be able to look at terabytes of data and create results from it in the way that AI is able to. So when you put these things together, and then with agentic AI, the ability to reason through a request and to break it down into sub actions and help execute that on behalf of people, put these things together, you have these forms of complementary intelligence. And that means that for people can be super, super augmented and turbocharged by AI. And that in many of different forms of work, it can help people concentrate on the highest impact, highest value pieces of their work. So for example, we talk a lot about healthcare, and we talk about how, I don't know the last time you went in to see a doctor, but I know I often go in to see a doctor and they're staring at a computer terminal. They're not looking at me, and they might be missing subtle cues. Or it may be, I think you may have heard this example. I think we talked about this example, Nichol, last time we chatted. Um, the example of the venture capitalist using AI in a meeting, in their investment committee meeting, and having the AI be able to call out forms of bias that might actually be sort of hard for people to talk about, but they have this little nudge, and then they have a much better, richer conversation and make a better decision as a result. And I think those are the types of examples that really can turbocharge how we work. Drawing from some customer examples, like we have an incredible customer, Wiley. So Wiley, if you don't know Wiley, they make a lot of educational materials. We've all probably interacted with Wiley materials at some point in our lives. And as you can imagine, every year, right before school starts, they're totally overwhelmed with customer requests and service questions and so on. And in fact, they have a hard time getting enough of a temporary surge in help to deal with those requests. And so they use agents to help deal with some of the more routine requests, like things like, where's my order, right? Or tell me about this particular product. Is it coming? That kind of thing. And they're able to then focus their people on the relationships that are needed to be cultivated for difficult customer questions, or the judgment that's needed to be exercised in those circumstances. And when you think about that, like, it's not just that they're able to achieve higher productivity. It's actually a less stressful experience for the people that are working in those circumstances, because they know that they're able to focus on the stuff that has the highest value, and the workload becomes much, much more manageable. That's the promise. It's like, that's that sort of more human promise about the future of work with agentic AI, but it depends on trust. It depends on us having the right guardrails for it.
For agentic AI, because it's reasoning, because it's doing multiple steps versus some of just the general prompting that people have gotten used to with LLMs, is there a higher level of trust that's needed specifically for agentic AI as it starts to take on more and more tasks?
It's a great question. And we launched our Agentforce suite of products at Dreamforce, which was a couple months ago. Um, I sort of a light bulb went off for me, because on the one hand, agents are taking action. So you might think, well, that requires a higher level of trust, and it does. But in some sense, actually, um, the way that we've built our Agentforce platform, it actually makes the surface area of risk less, not more, depending on how it's deployed. But I'll give you a couple of examples of the kinds of features that we've built in to help humans get the right results from AI agents. So one of them is a guardrail feature. So that when you're setting up an agent, let's say it's for, we talk about customer service, but you could create an agent for a marketing campaign. You say exactly what you want it for in a short series of, simple sentences, right? You're using natural language. And from that, the agent's able to extract what the tasks are. And Anything else, basically the direction is don't answer the question. If it's off topic or it's critical and you don't know the background to answer the question, elevate it to a person, right? So in that sense, the surface area is a little bit less, but it's still very, very important that we have all of the trust tools built in. And we have, for example, what we call our trust layer, which is built across our AI products, including our agentic AI products. And it has everything from prompt injection defense. So, like, let's say someone's actively trying to get malicious result, like trying to mess with your agent, we're going to detect it. Or it has things like toxicity detection. So, for example, in service interactions, things can get heated, customers can get upset. And you want to make sure that, that the responses are not heated. And you want to make sure that the agent is not saying things that are off color and so on. And it's those types of guardrails, which are also built in across our products and come standard.
So I just want to step back a minute and make sure that I have this. So because when I set up an agent of any kind, I'm delineating what its tasks are supposed to be. And also when built correctly or built in a human-centered way, I also say what it's not supposed to do. I think what I'm hearing you say is there's actually a higher level of transparency on what it's doing than, some of the general concerns people have about black box LLMs where they can't see how it's coming to its conclusions. But an agent is basically do this and then do this and do this. This is the world that you live in, and these are the decisions you can make.
That's right. And we have things like an audit trail where you can go in and see all of the interactions that an agent has engaged in and understand how they've gone and understand the human feedback on those interactions and so on. Now, I will say, as agents get more and more sophisticated, and this is our, the roadmap that we're building is all about enhancing that monitoring and all about enhancing human understanding of how agents are successful and being able to turn up or turn down the dials on particular parts of that. But it's really, really exciting because it enables the person to whom an agent is reporting, so to speak, to really evaluate how things are going and to be able to use very specific measures for that, as opposed to just like a wide open chatbot, for example. And so that's why I'm really, really excited about agentic AI. And I'm also really excited about all the things we're building to continue to make this a better and better experience.
I think the speed on agentic I think it's going to have the same type of speed that we saw, once ChatGPT got that interface that people could access, and then you saw an acceleration. Today, people can put together agents, or put together, systems or agent chains, but it's hard. And so that's where, Salesforce, companies like a Salesforce who are putting together these interfaces that make it easy for people to use agents. I think once that becomes really common, I think you're going to see adoption really, I think we're all going to see adoption really take off because it's just easier.
Yeah. And I have been amazed. We had at Dreamforce, we had this great thrust around having people create their own agents. And, you can do it in 5 minutes. So it is becoming very, very easy. I had a bunch of light bulb moments in setting up my own agents, and I continue to work with them and play with them. But yeah, I think we're heading into a new world.
I personally cannot wait to set up lots of agents for myself. I have so many things that I want done. And so I'm just curious, either what was your favorite agent to set up just personally, or what's the agent that you want?
So we work not only with our product teams, but we also work internally with our business technology teams on AI, and we're testing things to make sure they're safe and so on. But some of my favorite agents that we've been setting up internally are just ones to help people get answers more quickly. Let's say employees that are searching for particular policies on particular issues, or they're signing up for a new program or so on. There's a lot of frustration that can come from having to look in 5 different places for the answer to a question. And with agentic AI, I think we're able to really streamline that and get questions much more quickly. And that kind of stuff really excites me because, again, it's like you want to free up people to use their brain power where it's gonna like leverage outside results. And I think we see that from our sales teams when they don't have to look in a million places to be able to, understand what the best next action is for their sales prospect, or when they can get a really, really good brief for that next call with their prospect. Those kinds of things I get super, super excited about.
So, as an HR leader, assume I'm an HR leader. I'm thinking about bringing in agentic AI, or it's been raised by other parts of the business about bringing agentic AI in. What are the specific types of questions I should ask to make a thoughtful, values-driven decision that's ethical around agentic AI adoption?
So I think one of the most important things is there's different risk levels for where one uses AI, and the level of sort of diligence and guardrails is commensurate with those risk levels. For example, the use case I just talked about, which is having employees use AI to create the draft for a draft agenda for their next meeting with a sales prospect. Pretty low risk. You still want to have the systems in place to make sure that things are accurate and you're monitoring, you're getting the right types of responses, or you might want to monitor to make sure that you get the right sort of brand tone in those draft notes. But that's very, very different than, let's say, using AI in hiring, where there are a number of sort of regulatory questions to be aware of. And I think the level of diligence and monitoring should be higher for that, right? Because that's affecting someone's life outcomes. That's the kind of distinction that's been encoded in regulation like the EU AI Act, which sort of distinguishes different levels of risk. And I would say that for agentic AI, I think it can be super helpful in all kinds of environments, including for regulated industries or regulated use cases. It's just important to be aware of and to pay all the more attention to outcomes where the stakes are higher.
I had the thought that I'd love your thoughts on that the level of trust and buy-in that is
Mhm.
required for
Yeah,
successful implementations, because 80% of general implementations are not working up to match the PowerPoint yet, because we're all still
right.
figuring it out. And so I have the thought that responsible AI for the social contract inside of an organization to really get the people working on transforming the business, still gonna have to be responsible. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I absolutely agree. And I think, I gave you some examples of success stories with AI. We talked about Wiley and how um, agentic AI can make people's work lives more enjoyable. And I could give you lots of other examples of positive impact. I was talking the other day to our philanthropy team about an organization called Good 360, which is using AI, agentic AI, to help with disaster relief and to help coordinate to get the right resources to the right place, which is actually not a trivial question at all. I can say, having in a past life worked on disaster relief. There's so many good examples like that, but there are also examples of places where I guess what I want to say is I think people have to be center in this transformation. and having people understand where AI is being deployed, being transparent about where AI is being deployed, what data it's using, how it's working, all of that kind of stuff becomes very important. And having the sort of open channels for feedback, for people raising ideas, for telling you as as leaders, where is AI working? Where do they want AI? Where do they think it may need some improvement becomes very important. So I will say in my travels talking about AI, earlier this year, I was at a conference and I ran into an executive from a local town council in the UK. And he said to me, he had this idea to use essentially agentic AI to help social workers, take notes as they go out to reach their sort of clients. They go on visits to their clients, and generally they had sort of come back to the office, right? Transcribed their notes. And he thought, well, AI could really help with that, so they could spend much more time on the next steps rather than the note taking. And, I think the system worked, but the people didn't want it. And they didn't want it because there was just kind of this one little change that was needed, which is they actually wanted to go back to the office because they wanted to talk to their coworkers to make sense of and exchange insights about the day. And so just, I think that that one little tweak would have made a very, very big difference of like, asking people, understanding the context or the job to be done that people want with AI, and then inserting the technology into that context, I think will make a world of difference. And that's really why I think the HR leadership, people leadership is actually more important than ever in this world of AI, because people and leadership are going to matter more than ever, because it really is a partnership. It's about bringing together the best of human intelligence and the best of automated intelligence. And when we do that in a way that's built on trust, we get really, really great outcomes.
So, one of the things that you mentioned in that great case was the challenge around something being built without context, and that having that, making it so the project initially didn't get the results that they wanted. What are, in your travels,
Yeah.
you speak at many events and you're really a hyper connected person in this space. In your travels, what are some of the challenges or missteps that you've heard about, that people make that get in the way of a successful implementation?
Yeah. I'll answer that question at two levels. So, at one level, I think it's very important that we are really cognizant of um, some of the risks of AI, and that's why, as I've noted, we have built things like our trust layer, right? So there is bias in AI, and that becomes an issue when we're leveraging AI again for some of those higher risk use cases. And that's why we have things like toxicity detectors and so on. Um, I think that I don't want to say that those are solved problems because they're not. They require a lot of thought and attention. And that's why, again, the sort of leadership levels of different organizations need to be aware of how things are getting used and making sure that they've got appropriate diligence there. But I actually think the second level, in addition to thinking about sort of, you know, what are some of the risks of AI and how do we make sure that it gets deployed appropriately, really is about that question of people understanding how to use AI, um, and making sure that um, that as if you're in a position where you're deploying AI inside your company, you want to be asking of companies like Salesforce and others, like, what's my control panel? How do I have that single pane of glass, like our audit trail that tells you how things are going? And how do I know how to make adjustments and so on? And I think those types of questions are the getting to sort of the people side of the equation, and making sure that the tools themselves are built with what we call trust patterns that help people spot where there might be risk. Like, I'll give you an example. For the setup in our sales agent, where you can use an AI agent to help sort of make outbound, like go send emails to a bunch of latent leads. One of the setup flows that it has is it's asking basically someone to put a rate limit on the number of emails that agent's going to send. And that sounds maybe commonsensical, but an agent could theoretically send a lot of emails in the course of 1 minute to one prospect, and that probably is not a great idea, right? So it's essentially like just there's simple steps that need to be built in to make sure that people are getting the right results from AI. And I think that's going to become increasingly essential. And it's why it's such a big focus for my team.
For HR leaders who are just beginning their journey, what would you say to them? What should they be thinking about?
Yeah, I think, and there might be lots of people in this position, HR leaders that are just beginning their journey with agentic AI. Let me say a few things. One, um, I really do think this is a question of the social contract within an organization, that trust has to be the underlying foundation of all of it. And that, as we've talked about, leadership is more important than ever in this era where agentic AI is transforming how we do work. Um, there are, as I've talked about, many guardrails that are built into platforms like Salesforce. But there is no platform that is bulletproof. There is no platform um, that doesn't require human leadership to judge how things are going, right? And so this is what I would say to HR leaders. I would say, in addition to all of that and to really taking that leadership role seriously, I would reinforce setting clear policies, right? Establishing guidelines around how agents are used, especially in HR practices. That question of continuous monitoring and evaluation, again, like especially when we're talking about AI for HR purposes, but also more broadly, how's it going? Do we know how's it going and how we make improvements to keep getting better and better results? And finally, but most importantly, the culture of ethical AI, which is about transparency, it's about employee voice, but it's also about having people know how to use AI responsibly. All of those things become super, super critical, and leadership on all of those aspects is really important.
Yes, it goes back to that old saying about you can only move as quickly as the speed of trust. Okay, one last question. Earlier, we were talking about a culture of trust and transparency. And you've mentioned a few times here and other times I've heard you speak that ethics really have to be embedded in a company's culture, not just the tech. I'd love to hear your thoughts around this intersection of AI compatible cultures and what does that look like in terms of how someone approaches even thinking about bringing AI into their organization.
I'm curious what you mean by AI compatible cultures, like cultures that can work for AI. Is that what you mean?
By an AI compatible culture, I mean cultures that have that kind of trust and feedback,
Yeah.
that are, always learning cultures, very adaptable
Yeah.
cultures. And so
Yes.
it
Yeah.
seems like there is a cultural type that is very compatible to quick
Mhm.
adoption. And and
Mhm.
and I think that trust and transparency is a part of that. So I'm really curious about how other people think about AI and culture.
I think that's right. I think culture plays a very, very important role in thinking about how to leverage um, AI successfully. That said, I'd also think that it's there's not a one size fits all answer to the question. At Salesforce, trust has been our number one value since our founding 25 plus years ago. And I will say that what I've learned from my time at Salesforce has been that um, culture is built and values are instilled from the top down and bottom up at the same time, right? So we move fast and we change. We're very, very nimble and can sort of change strategic direction very quickly. And trust is sort of the glue that allows us to do that. And I think that's kind of um, I think that metaphor extends to companies that are adopting agentic AI because, again, it's a paradigm change for how we do work. But when trust means that we're transparent about the choices that we're making, we publish our strategies for the whole company to see in great detail. We broadcast our executive gatherings so people understand what's getting debated. Um, it's that kind of transparency. It's that kind of we're openly taking risks and talking about the risks that we're taking and what we're doing to safeguard those risks and inviting people to be part of the conversation. I think all of those things are sort of transferable to any organization that is really looking at agentic AI and figuring out like where are the places where to start, where are the beachheads, and then where does it expand. Um, I think these types of things are going to become increasingly important as agentic AI gets more and more capable.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I so appreciate you and the work that you're doing. And thank you for coming onto our platform to speak to our audience and to help them understand what's happening with agentic AI.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. And I'll say it again, I really do think people are central to this transformation. The work of human resources and employee success has never been more important than today.
And that's going to do it for this week's episode. A big thank you to Paula for sharing her experiences and deep insights with us. Before we say goodbye, I encourage you to follow the AI+HI project wherever you enjoy your podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to comment, leave a review. It's very helpful. And finally, you can find all of our episodes on our website at shrm.org/AI+HI. Thanks for joining the conversation, and we'll catch you next time.